In 2002, an elderly man named Joseph Newton Chandler III is found dead in his small apartment in Eastlake, Ohio. He had been slowly dying of cancer, and he took his own life. It looked like a sad but ordinary end to a quiet, lonely existence. He had no family that anyone knew about, and he'd left around $82,000 sitting in his bank account. So the authorities did the normal thing. They went looking for his next of kin, someone to inherit that money. And that's where things took a turn. Because when they started digging into Joseph Chandler's records, they uncovered something that turned a routine death into one of the strangest mysteries in America. The man they had known as Joseph Chandler for over 20 years was not Joseph Chandler at all. In fact, the real Joseph Chandler had been dead since 1945. To understand that, you have to know who the real Joseph Newton Chandler was. He was a little boy. In 1945, on Christmas Day, 8-year-old Joseph was killed in a car crash in Texas, along with his parents. His short life ended there, on a road in Texas, decades before that old man ever turned up in Ohio. So, how was a dead child living and working in Ohio in the 2000s? The answer is that someone had stolen his name. Back in 1978, a stranger had taken the dead boy's details and used them to get a Social Security card all the way out in South Dakota under the name Joseph Newton Chandler III. From that moment on, this stranger simply became Joseph. He built an entire life on top of a dead child's identity. And he was careful about it. He got a steady job as an electrical draftsman in the Cleveland area. He rented a modest apartment. He kept to himself, made very few friends, and never talked about his past. The people who worked with him for years described him as quiet and a little odd, the kind of man who never let anyone get close. Nobody had any reason to question who he was, because he never gave them one. For more than 2 decades, the fake Joseph Chandler lived right out in the open, and nobody noticed a thing. Once the police realized the man had been using a dead boy's identity, the obvious question was simple. Who was he really? And almost as quickly, a second, more unsettling question followed. What was he hiding from? Ordinary people don't steal the identity of a child who died in a car crash. People who do that are usually running from something serious. And the more investigators learned, the stranger it got. They found out he had kept a suitcase packed and ready by the door at all times, as if he was prepared to disappear at a moment's notice. He had clearly built this fake life to vanish into and to never be found. That led to some wild theories. Some people wondered if this mystery man might be a famous fugitive who had never been caught. There was even serious talk that he could be the Zodiac Killer, the notorious murderer who was never identified. For years, that idea hung over the case. Nobody could rule it out, because nobody knew who he actually was. He was a man with no real name, no past, and no answers, and he had taken all of it to his grave. The case went cold for years. The problem was that investigators had almost nothing to work with. The man was dead, his fingerprints couldn't be recovered, and the only piece of him they had was a tiny tissue sample taken during a hospital visit back in 2000. They pulled a DNA profile from it, but when they ran it through the usual databases, there were no matches. It was a dead end. Then, in 2014, the US Marshals took the case on, and they tried something that was still fairly new at the time. Instead of hunting for a direct match to the mystery man, they used something called genetic genealogy. The idea behind it is clever. Even if your own DNA isn't in any database, your distant cousin's DNA might be. on the same kind of ancestry websites that millions of people use to build family trees. If you can find those distant relatives, you can slowly work backward and build the family tree until it points to one person. It wasn't easy. The DNA sample was old and badly damaged, with only a tiny fraction of it still usable, so the experts had to invent new methods just to read it. But bit by bit, it worked. The DNA pointed them toward a family with the last name Nichols. They built out the family tree, narrowed it down, and eventually tracked down a man's son living in Ohio. When that son's DNA was tested, it matched. After 16 years, the mystery man finally had a name. He was Robert Ivan Nichols. Robert Nichols wasn't a famous killer at all. He was actually a war hero. He had grown up in Indiana, served in the US Navy during World War II, and survived his ship being torn apart by a wave of kamikaze attacks near the end of the war. So many of the men around him died that day. When he finally made it home, he was so shaken that he burned his Navy uniforms, and he carried a Purple Heart for the wounds he took. He got married, and he had 3 sons. But somewhere along the way, something broke in Robert. In the 1960s, he suddenly divorced his wife and walked out on his family. The last his children ever heard from him was a letter in 1965, postmarked from California, in which he told them they would soon find out why he had left. They never did. He simply vanished from their lives, and years later, he reappeared on the other side of the country as a dead boy named Joseph Chandler. When his son was finally told the truth, all those years later, he said he felt no anger toward his father. He was just relieved to finally know what had happened to him. It put a long family mystery to rest. But the biggest question of all was never answered. We still don't know why Robert Nichols threw away his whole life, abandoned the people who loved him, and hid under a fake name for the rest of his days. Whatever he was running from, whatever secret made him pack that suitcase and never look back, he kept it to himself, right to the very end. What this case did give us was something bigger than one man's story. The method they used to crack it, using DNA and family trees to put a name to a total stranger, has since gone on to solve dozens of cold cases that once seemed impossible, including the hunt that finally caught the Golden State Killer. Robert Nichols managed to erase himself completely. He just didn't count on science one day being able to find him anyway. What do you think Robert Nichols was hiding that was so terrible he gave up everyone and everything to escape it? Let me know your theories down in the comments. And if you enjoy mysteries like this one, go ahead and subscribe, because there's plenty more to come.